I never expected my quiet life to explode into such drama, but when you have a mother-in-law like Patricia, anything is possible. I'm Emma, and this is the story of how my mother-in-law's greed and assumptions led to one of the most satisfying moments of my life. Growing up, my father always taught me the value of humility and hard work. Despite being the CEO of Anderson Technologies, one of the largest tech companies in the country, he made sure I understood that wealth wasn't something to flaunt or take for granted. My mother shared his values, and together they raised me to be independent and discreet about our family's status. When I met David at a local coffee shop where I worked part-time during my master's program, I fell in love with his kind heart and genuine nature. He had no idea about my background, and I preferred it that way. I wanted someone who loved me for who I was, not for my family's wealth. Our relationship blossomed naturally, and after a year of dating, David proposed. That's when I first met his mother, Patricia. From the moment she laid eyes on me, I could tell she wasn't impressed. Her perfectly manicured nails, designer clothes, and judgmental gaze made it clear she had expected someone different for her son. "So, Emma, tell me about your family," Patricia asked during our first dinner together, her voice dripping with barely concealed disdain. "My parents raised me well," I replied simply, following my father's lifelong advice about discretion. "They taught me good values." Patricia's eyes narrowed at my vague response. "And what do they do for a living?" "They're in business," I said, taking a sip of water. It wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. David squeezed my hand under the table, sensing my discomfort. He knew I was private about my family life, though even he didn't know the full extent of my background. I had told him my parents were successful but preferred to live quietly, and he respected that. The wedding planning brought out Patricia's true colors. She constantly made snide remarks about my simple taste and questioned how we would afford everything. I offered to contribute to the wedding costs, but she dismissed me with a wave of her hand. "Oh darling, we all know you can barely afford your rent working at that coffee shop," she said with fake sympathy. "David's father and I will handle everything. We want our son to have the wedding he deserves." What Patricia didn't know was that I had already privately arranged with David to split the wedding costs. My coffee shop savings were actually quite substantial, thanks to my own successful investments and the trust fund my parents had set up for me. But I let Patricia have her moment, knowing that someday the truth would come out. The wedding was beautiful despite Patricia's constant interference. She insisted on inviting all her high society friends, while I kept my guest list small, inviting only my closest friends. My parents, understanding my desire for privacy, agreed to attend as regular guests rather than the hosts they actually were. Life after the wedding was relatively peaceful for the first few years. David and I bought a lovely house in a nice neighborhood, something that seemed to puzzle Patricia endlessly. She couldn't understand how we afforded it on David's middle management salary and my new job as a marketing consultant. "Did you take out some massive loan?" she would ask during her surprise visits, I scanning our comfortable home with suspicion. "We're good with our finances," I would reply, hiding my amusement at her confusion. Then came the event that changed everything, the passing of David's father, Robert. He had been the buffer between Patricia's excessive behavior and the rest of the family, often reining in her more dramatic tendencies. His death not only left an emotional void but also triggered Patricia's worst qualities. Robert had left behind a substantial inheritance of $4.5 million, to be divided among David and his two siblings. It wasn't a fortune by my family's standards, but it was significant enough to bring out the worst in people. Patricia, now a widow, seemed determined to control how the inheritance would be distributed. One evening, about a month after Robert's passing, Patricia called a family meeting. David's siblings, Michael and Sarah, were there with their spouses. As we sat in Patricia's overly decorated living room, I could sense something was about to go wrong. "Before we discuss the inheritance," Patricia began, her voice sickly sweet, "I think we need to address some concerns about how it should be distributed." Her eyes fixed on me with barely concealed hostility. David tensed beside me. "Mom, Dad's will was clear about how he wanted things divided." "Yes, but circumstances change," Patricia continued. "Some of us have family obligations and responsibilities that others don't." I knew where this was heading, but I remained silent, watching the scene unfold. "Emma, dear," Patricia turned to me, her voice dripping with false concern. "I've been doing some research about your background. It's quite interesting what I found, or rather, what I didn't find." My heart started beating faster, not from fear but from anticipation. Had she actually managed to uncover anything about my family? "You see," Patricia continued, addressing the room more than me, I've discovered that Emma here has been less than truthful about her circumstances. She claims to have family, but I can find no record of them. No social media presence, no public records, nothing. David's siblings shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had always been kind to me, if a bit distant. "Mom, what are you saying?" David asked, his voice tight with anger. Patricia stood up, clearly relishing her moment in the spotlight. "I'm saying that your wife has been lying to us. She claims to have this wonderful family, but I believe she's an orphan who's been making up stories to hide her humble background." The room fell silent. I could feel David's hand tightening around mine, but I gave it a reassuring squeeze. This was getting interesting. "Think about it," Patricia continued, warming to her theme. "She works at a coffee shop when you meet her, never talks about her family, never invites us to meet them. It all makes sense now." I remained calm, watching as Patricia worked herself up into a frenzy. "And now, with your father's inheritance at stake, I think we need to consider the fact that some of us have real family obligations. Emma has no family to support, while Michael and Sarah have children and actual extended families to consider." David stood up, fury evident on his face. "Mom, that's enough." But Patricia wasn't finished. She pulled out what she thought was her trump card, a folder full of papers. "I've had a private investigator looking into Emma's background," she announced triumphantly, "and guess what? There's no record of her parents anywhere. She's been lying to us all along." I had to admire her thoroughness, even if it was misguided. Of course there were no obvious records. My parents had always been careful about their privacy, using various legal structures to protect our family's identity. "Patricia," I said calmly, speaking for the first time since the meeting began, "are you suggesting that the inheritance should be distributed differently because you believe I'm an orphan?" "Exactly," Patricia exclaimed, pleased that I seemed to be catching on. "Since you have no family obligations, David's share should be reduced. It's only fair to those with real family needs." I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text. The timing would have to be perfect for what was about to happen. "And what would constitute a real family obligation?" I asked, keeping her talking. Patricia launched into a detailed explanation of why Michael and Sarah's families deserved more, repeatedly emphasizing my apparent lack of family connections. She was so engrossed in her speech that she didn't notice the sound of cars pulling up outside. The doorbell rang just as Patricia was reaching the crescendo of her argument. "Who could that be?" she asked, annoyed at the interruption. "Oh, I took the liberty of inviting some people to join us," I said pleasantly. "I thought it was time they met the family." The front door opened, and the atmosphere in the room changed instantly. My father walked in first, his commanding presence filling the space. Behind him came my mother, elegant as always, and several members of our company's board of directors who had become like family over the years. Patricia's face turned an interesting shade of white as she recognized my father from numerous business magazine covers and television appearances. The folder she was holding slipped from her nerveless fingers, scattering papers across the floor. "I believe you were just saying something about my daughter having no family?" my father asked, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. David's siblings were staring open-mouthed, while Patricia seemed to be having trouble forming words. You're," she stammered. "William Anderson, CEO of Anderson Technologies," my father supplied helpfully, "Emma's father, and this is my wife, Charlotte. We've been quite curious to finally meet you, especially after hearing about your interesting theories about our existence." My mother stepped forward, her smile razor-sharp. "We've been respecting Emma's wish for privacy all these years, but it seems that some clarification is needed." Patricia sank back into her chair, her face ashen. But the private investigator found nothing because we value our privacy," I explained gently, something I thought my in-laws would understand and respect. David was looking between me and my parents, a slow smile spreading across his face as everything finally clicked into place. All those times I'd been vague about my family's business, all the understated explanations about how we could afford our house, it all made sense now. "Mr. and Mrs. Anderson," Michael spoke up, looking mortified, "we had no idea." "Of course you didn't," my mother assured him. "Emma wanted to make her own way in the world, and we respected that. We're only here now because it seems some people," she glanced at Patricia, "have made unfortunate assumptions that needed to be corrected." Patricia finally found her voice. But the coffee shop, and the marketing job." "I worked at the coffee shop because I enjoyed it," I explained. "And my marketing consultant role? I actually consult for our family company's subsidiaries, among others. I just never saw the need to broadcast that fact." My father stepped forward, his presence commanding everyone's attention. Now, about this inheritance matter, I understand there's some concern about family obligations? Patricia seemed to shrink in her chair. The private investigator's papers lay forgotten on the floor, a testament to her failed scheme. I think, David said firmly, that we should follow Dad's wishes exactly as stated in his will. Equal shares, no adjustments needed. His siblings nodded quickly, looking relieved to put the whole matter behind them. My father smiled approvingly. A wise decision. Family wealth, whether great or modest, should never be a source of division. As the reality of the situation sank in, Patricia's carefully constructed plan crumbled around her. Her attempt to manipulate the inheritance had not only failed but had exposed her own prejudices and scheming nature to the entire family. In the days that followed, the story of Patricia's failed scheme became a cautionary tale in both families. David's siblings, embarrassed by their mother's behavior, made efforts to build better relationships with us. They were particularly mortified when they learned that I had privately set up college funds for their children months ago, without telling anyone. Patricia, however, found herself in an uncomfortable position. Her social standing, which she had cultivated so carefully over the years, took a significant hit. Many of her high society friends, who had daughters or sons they'd hoped to match with David before he met me, now realized that Patricia had been just as clueless about her son's wife's background as they were. The aftermath of the revelation brought about significant changes in our family dynamics. David, who had always suspected there was more to my background than I let on, was amazed but not entirely surprised by the truth. "You know," he said one evening as we sat in our garden, "I always wondered how you knew so much about business strategy for someone who supposedly just worked at a coffee shop." I laughed. "I did try to drop hints now and then. Remember when I helped you prepare for your management presentation?" "You mean when you casually outlined a complete corporate restructuring plan that my bosses ended up implementing?" "Yeah, that might have been a clue." The truth about my background also led to some amusing moments. Patricia, in an attempt to salvage her reputation, tried to rewrite history, claiming she had always seen something special in me. Her sudden attempts to bond with me and name-drop my father in social situations were transparent but somewhat entertaining. "Oh, Emma dear," she would say whenever we had company, "you must tell everyone that charming story about your father's meeting with the Prime Minister." I would usually respond with a gentle reminder about the value of privacy and discretion, which never failed to make her uncomfortable. My parents, for their part, found the whole situation rather amusing. My father, who had built his company from the ground up and never forgotten his own humble beginnings, particularly enjoyed watching Patricia squirm. "You know," he told me during one of our weekly family dinners, "your mother-in-law reminds me of some of the shareholders I dealt with in the early days. They were so focused on appearances that they couldn't see the real value right in front of them." My mother added, the look on her face when we walked in, "I haven't seen someone that shocked since your father bought out his biggest competitor without anyone knowing it was coming." The inheritance issue was settled exactly as Robert had intended, with equal shares going to his 3 children. David and I decided to use his portion to set up a charitable foundation focusing on education and entrepreneurship, something that would have made his father proud. Patricia's reaction to this decision was predictably dramatic. "But why would you give away such a fortune?" she demanded when we announced our plans. "Because, Mom," David explained patiently, "some things are more important than money. Dad taught us that, remember?" The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone. Patricia, who had been so concerned about family obligations and financial responsibilities, had failed to see that true family values had nothing to do with wealth or status. As for my career, I continued working as a marketing consultant, though I no longer felt the need to be quite so vague about my connections to Anderson Technologies. My colleagues were surprised but appreciative when they learned that the quiet consultant who had been giving them advice was actually the daughter of their company's CEO. "So all those times you helped us navigate corporate politics," my friend Sarah from the marketing department trailed off. "I might have had some insider knowledge," I admitted with a smile. Life settled into a new normal. Patricia's attempts to control family matters became less frequent, especially after she realized that her previous behavior had cost her more than just her dignity. The respect she had commanded through her supposed social status was replaced by a reputation for being calculating and manipulative. David's siblings, Michael and Sarah, became regular visitors to our home, often bringing their children for weekend barbecues and family gatherings. The cousins played together while we adults enjoyed conversations that no longer carried underlying tensions about money or status. One particularly memorable evening, about a year after the inheritance incident, we hosted a family dinner that included both my parents and my in-laws. Patricia, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the meal, finally spoke up. "I owe everyone an apology," she said, her voice lacking its usual artificial sweetness. "Especially you, Emma. I let my assumptions and prejudices cloud my judgment, and I behaved terribly." The table fell silent. This was the first genuine admission of wrongdoing we'd heard from Patricia. I was so focused on maintaining an image of wealth and status that I couldn't see the real treasure right in front of me, a daughter-in-law who embodies all the values I should have been teaching my own children. It was a surprising moment of self-awareness from a woman who had spent most of her life cultivating appearances. Whether it was genuine remorse or simply a calculated move to rehabilitate her image remained to be seen, but it was a start. My father, ever the businessman, saw an opportunity for growth. "Patricia," he said, "why don't you join us on the board of David and Emma's new foundation? Your experience with social networking could be valuable in reaching potential donors." The offer surprised everyone, but it was a masterstroke. It gave Patricia a chance to redirect her energy towards something positive while keeping her tendencies for social climbing in check. As time passed, the story of Patricia's failed inheritance scheme became something of a family legend, told with increasing humor at gatherings and celebrations. Even Patricia learned to laugh about it, though her cheeks still reddened at the memory of that day. The experience taught us all valuable lessons about assumptions, honesty, and the true meaning of family wealth. David and I went on to have children of our own, and we made sure to instill in them the same values my parents had taught me, that character matters more than money, and true worth isn't measured by bank accounts or social status. Years later, when our daughter asked why we lived more modestly than some of her friends despite our family's wealth, I told her the story of how her grandmother Patricia learned the hard way that appearances can be deceiving. "Remember, sweetheart," I said, "it's not about how much money you have or what other people think of you. It's about who you are and how you treat others." She nodded thoughtfully, then asked, "Is that why Grandma Patricia always gets nervous when Great-Grandpa William comes to visit?" I couldn't help but laugh. Some things never change, but at least our family had grown stronger through the experience. Patricia's scheme had backfired spectacularly, but in doing so, it had paved the way for more authentic relationships and valuable life lessons for generations to come. Looking back, I'm almost grateful for Patricia's misguided attempt to manipulate the inheritance. It forced us to confront the assumptions and prejudices that had been simmering beneath the surface of our family relationships. More importantly, it showed that sometimes the best way to handle other people's misconceptions is to let them play out their schemes until they discover the truth for themselves. The incident also taught me that my parents' emphasis on privacy and humility had been wise. There's a certain power in letting people underestimate you, in knowing who you are without having to prove it to anyone. Patricia's greatest mistake wasn't just in assuming I had no family, it was in believing that family worth could be measured in dollars and social status. Today, our extended family gatherings are warm and genuine affairs, free from the underlying tensions that once plagued them. Patricia, though still conscious of social status, has learned to find fulfillment in her work with the foundation rather than in manipulating family dynamics. And every now and then, when someone new joins the family, we can't help but share a knowing smile when they hear the story of how Patricia's $4.5 million inheritance scheme led to one of the most memorable family revelations of all time.